And we're recording. Hello, it's me again, Chaz. Making another video. Currently, the World Cup qualifiers are underway in a few zones. That's in the AFC, the Qualifiers, and today the OFC are now starting their World Cup qualifications. The AFC are currently in their third round of qualifiers. The Qualifiers are currently in match day 7 of 18. And as I said earlier, the OFC have just started their qualifying process. This video, though, I will mainly be focusing on the AFC. So far, out of any other zone, the AFC have the most teams that have already been eliminated from the World Cup qualifiers. As I speak, Australia are playing Bahrain, and Japan are playing China. All games currently are 0-0, still in the first half. So yeah, I'll be speaking about the process, how round 1, 2 came underway and how they ended up as, and then I'll be speaking through how the other rounds will be. So far in the AFC, there's 6 different rounds. This third round is where teams will qualify for the World Cup directly. So the qualifying process, I did say it contains 6 rounds in the AFC. It's actually 5 rounds. The 6th round will be a playoff. Now, out of the 46 teams originally that are part of the AFC, 8 of those nations will have a chance to play at the next World Cup. One nation, which could be possibly a ninth nation for the AFC to play at the World Cup, they will have to go through a playoff system. I will talk about the playoff system a bit more later. But for now, I will talk about the very first round of the AFC World Cup qualifiers. Okay, so now, nations that are ranked from 27 to 46 will be paired against each other. They would have to play each other home and away. And if they win that game, they'll go through to the second round of the World Cup qualifiers. So in the very first round, 10 nations would be eliminated. So then 36 nations will move on to the second round of the AFC World Cup qualifiers. Quick note that the very first 2 rounds of the AFC's World Cup qualifiers also work as qualifiers for the Asian Cup in 2027. The nations that did lose these games, they would have qualified for the third round qualification for the Asian Cup. Well, those were the best losers. The others would have to go through another qualifying playoff to see if they could get a chance to then qualify for the AFC Asian Cup proper. Indonesia, who is the first Asian nation to ever compete at a World Cup in 1938, they managed to beat Brunei 6-0 twice. It's a total aggregate of 12-0. Which meant they went through to the second round of the World Cup qualifiers, AFC. So the 10 teams that did qualify from this round, they also qualified for the Asian Cup third round themselves. They would join the other 26 teams that automatically qualified for the qualified for the second round of the AFC's World Cup qualifiers. Now, all 36 teams will be split up into 9 groups of 4. The top 2 teams of each of those groups will go on to qualify for the third round of the World Cup qualifiers, and would go on to qualify for the Asian Cup, while the losers, whoever finished 3rd and 4th, will qualify for the third round of the Asian Cup qualifiers. There were no surprises in the second round, teams getting eliminated. Every team that has qualified for a World Cup previously in the AFC all managed to make it to the third round. So now the 18 teams that did make it to the third round, they were again split up into three groups of 6 nations. So that is currently where we are at right now in the AFC. Today is the first day. Matches will start. As I said earlier, 2 matches now 3 matches have started. So now I'm just gonna mention each group, starting off with Group A and all 6 nations that are currently in that group. So Group A has Iran, Qatar, Uzbekistan, United Emirates, Kyrgyzstan, and North Korea. 4 nations in this group have qualified for the World Cup in the past. There's a slim possibility that all 4 of these nations that have qualified in the previous World Cups can all qualify for the 2026 World Cup. If you come first or second, you will qualify for the World Cup directly, but there will be another chance if you finish third or fourth, you'll get put through to the fourth round. I'll talk more about the fourth round later. So starting with Iran. Iran have qualified for 6 World Cups in the past and have qualified for the World Cup in the last 3. Unfortunately, Iran has never made it out of the group stage in any of the World Cups they have qualified. The closest they have came was in the 2018 World Cup in Russia, where they finished behind both Spain and Portugal. Iran had 4 points, while Spain and Portugal both had 5 points. Next up, Qatar. Qatar have qualified for 1 World Cup. That was the World Cup they've hosted, and the last one, 2022. They finished bottom of their group at that tournament. Both Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan have never qualified for a World Cup. Maybe both or one of these nations will this time around. United Arab Emirates, UAE, have qualified for 1 World Cup. That was the World Cup in Italy in 1990. They didn't make it out of the group stage at that World Cup. And finally, North Korea. North Korea have actually withdrew from a few World Cups. Most recently, the last World Cup in 2022, though that was during you know what. So there was quite a few nations that did withdraw from qualifications for the 2022 World Cup. However, they have competed in a few. Their best performance was the 1966 World Cup, where they reached the quarterfinals, being the very first Asian nation to reach that point at a World Cup. They lost to Portugal. Portugal ended up finishing third at that World Cup themselves. Okay, that was Group A. Now let's move on to Group B. So Group B has South Korea, Iraq, Jordan, Oman, Palestine, and Kuwait. So in this group, only 2 nations have qualified for a World Cup in the past. That was both South Korea and Kuwait. The other 4 teams in this group have never qualified for a World Cup. Maybe this might be the first time they all do that. Yeah, so South Korea, they also the first Asian team with Japan to host a World Cup, and that was in 2002, which was also the best performance of South Korea, reaching the semi-finals. South Korea has also qualified for the most World Cups out of any Asian nation. They have qualified for the World Cup consistently since 1986, making that 10 World Cups in a row. But outside of their performance in 2002, they haven't made it outside of the round of 16. Maybe they might make this change at the next World Cup. Well, that's if they qualify first. Iraq, the only other team in this group that have qualified for a World Cup, but it was just the once when they qualified in 1986. They didn't make it out of the group stage. Since then, they haven't reached a World Cup. Like I said, the other four nations in this group haven't made it to the World Cup, but things can change. Now, Group C, five, so pretty much the whole group, other than one nation, have all qualified for at least one World Cup. The group is Japan, Australia, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, China, and Indonesia. As mentioned before, Japan, along with South Korea, were the first Asian nations to host the World Cup. Japan's also the first Asian nation that is a member of FIFA. Since 1998, Japan has qualified for the World Cup consistently, having the second longest run as an Asian country qualifying for a World Cup. So they have not made it past the round of 16. The last two tournaments, they have reached the last 16. Australia originally started qualifying for the World Cup from the OFC, but since they've been a member of the AFC, they have qualified consistently since 2006. When they were a member of the OFC, they only qualified for one World Cup. Australia hasn't reached further than a round of 16. Okay, now Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia will be hosting the 2034 World Cup. But in previous World Cups, they qualified for the last two, but they didn't make it out their group stage. The best performance they've had was in 1994 World Cup in the USA, where they reached the round of 16. Bahrain are the only team in this group that has never made it to the World Cup in the past. This could be their very first time. China has made it to the World Cup once in 2002, but hasn't qualified since. As I mentioned earlier in other videos, Indonesia are the very first Asian country to ever compete at a World Cup. But since then, since 1938, they haven't made it to another World Cup. This could be the first time that they've qualified since then. And if they do, they would actually break Wales's record as the longest gap between appearances at a World Cup. That current record is 54 years. The 1958 World Cup in Sweden and the last World Cup, the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, those were the appearances for Wales. So again, there's a possibility there that Indonesia can qualify for this World Cup. So those were all three groups, and the remaining 18 teams left in the AFC World Cup qualifiers. There could only be 8 guaranteed qualifiers and 1 potential qualifier. This World Cup will have the most nations that will qualify for a World Cup, being more than any other, which means that this World Cup for the very first time would have 8 nations from Asia, a possible 9, being the most amount of countries that will compete to win the World Cup coming from the AFC. So that was the third round. Now, like I said, the third round, the top 2 countries in all 3 groups will make it directly to the World Cup. The nations who finished 3rd and 4th in each group will go on to the 4th round. The 6 nations that are put into the 4th round will be split up into 2 groups of 3. The winner of those 2 groups will go directly to the World Cup, while the nations that finish 2nd in that group will again go to another round, which is the 5th round. Now, the 5th round, the losers or the runners-up, of both of those groups will compete against each other, home and away. the winner of that match will then go to the Inter-Confederation playoff to represent the AFC. And that would be the final chance that nation will have to compete in the 2026 World Cup. If that nation is ranked high enough, they would only have to play one time. But if they're ranked low, they would have to play 2 times. The Inter-Confederation playoffs is the last time a nation will have to qualify for the World Cup. 6 teams are in this playoffs. 1 will be from the AFC, 1 from the CONMEBOL, 1 from the CAF, 1 from the OFC, and finally 2 from the CONCACAF. I believe the reason there is 2 teams that could compete in the CONCACAF for the CONCACAF in the playoffs is because Mexico, USA, and Canada are part of the CONCACAF, so the host nations region get an extra team that could compete in the playoffs. So yes, that's the journey a nation would have to get to the World Cup in the AFC and in the playoffs as well, a little bit. A few matches have now finished in the in the AFC's qualifiers. Tomorrow I would do a review on the other games, and I'll give information. I give my opinion on what teams I do believe will qualify from that zone. So yeah, this was my video on the AFC's World Cup qualifiers. I'll be doing more about on these videos. Every time the AFC or any other regions are having World Cup qualifiers. More matches will be going on today in the AFC, so as well as the CONMEBOL and the OFC is also starting off today with a qualifying match. So thanks again for watching. I appreciate it. And thanks.